the self-imposed tax that the hunters and our anglers pay, and bless them, because they truly are the advocates when it comes to conservation. And so they're putting their money where their mouth is. And because of the Pittman-Robertson and Dingell-Johnson Act, their activities fund state fish and wildlife and game agencies for them to be able to do their conservation work. And it really is hoping to sustain our wildlife, and was really excited this year. And you'll see this going forward on our duck stamp. We are honoring our hunters and giving them that acknowledgement that when it comes to conservation, they are truly the ones that are allowing us to be able to be stewards for everyone else, even for the species that aren't hunted. Good afternoon. This is Aurelia Skipwith, Director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and this is the Tom Rowland Podcast.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast today. We've got a great guest, the U.S. Director of the Fish and Wildlife Service is here with us today, Director Aurelia Skipwith. She has a very interesting story of being introduced to the outdoors as a young lady. She is a city girl that learned all about the outdoors through her family, like most of us, and very smart individual. She has a degree in biology, molecular biology, I think, and also a law degree. She was appointed as the director of the Fish and Wildlife by President Trump, and she has done a really good job to expand access for hunting and fishing in her term so far. Over 4 million acres opened for hunting and fishing through the Fish and Wildlife Service. She's going to tell us all about that, all about what the future plans are, and all about how hunters and fishermen can work together with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to continue to protect our access, to continue to expand our access, and also to help with the conservation of all the species that we love so much. So, with no further ado, Director Aurelia Skipwith. Since the first episode, we've had a dedicated email address because I want to get to know you. I want to hear from you. Your suggestions have made some of the best shows we've ever made because you've suggested amazing guests that maybe I didn't know before. I look them up, I find them, and you know what? You're exactly right. They made fantastic podcast guests. I'd like to find a way to communicate with you even better. I've looked into private Facebook groups. I've looked into all different kinds of things. I think I found the best way that we can communicate, that you can give me those questions, those suggestions, and that is through text. You can simply text me, 305-930-7346. Yep, you'll reach me, and I will text you back. And that is a place where we can open a conversation. You can tell me why you think this guy is a great, or girl is a great podcast guest, and we can carry on a short conversation there. That is the best way. I can also give you information, news on when new shows are dropping, discounts that are exclusive to the podcast audience. Man, this thing seems to be the way to go. So that is 305-930-7346. Shoot me a text, see what happens. I will text you back. We're going to thank our sponsors real quick, and at the top of that list is Empire Covers. Empire Covers is a fantastic place to go to get an affordable cover for your boat. And you know what? They have covers for all kinds of things. You can cover your RV, your grill, your jet ski. You could cover just about anything. And if you go to empirecovers.com/TRP, you can get 15% off your entire order plus free shipping. And you definitely want to use that because one of those boat covers could be pretty heavy. You probably save on the shipping. So empirecovers.com/TRP. That's the place to go for an affordable boat cover with incredible customer service and customer satisfaction. Barracuda Tackle is a place that you can go to get the best cast net on the planet. They make all different kinds of cast nets. You can get custom nets. You can get custom colored nets. They have fantastic fishing accessories. Definitely check out barracudatackle.com. Boat Hammock Stands is a place to go for a hammock stand for your boat. If you want to hang a hammock in your boat, maybe you never even thought about it. Maybe most people think it's impossible because there's just not any place to tie off. Boat hammock stands make a stand that goes into your rod holder. It'll hold 350 pounds. It's made out of stainless steel. It's made in America. The thing is fantastic. It's high quality, and it offers a place to hang a hammock in your existing rod holder. You got to check out boathammockstands.com. You'll be glad you did. You'll have the most comfortable boat in the fleet. Hook gear, the shirt that I'm wearing here, this is the Tide Point. This is a fantastic shirt. It actually stretches. I do not wear button downs unless they are these or unless they stretch. This shirt stretches. It is fantastic, and it is my favorite button down ever. You can go get one of these. You can get anything at Hook by using the code SE30 at checkout. Check out the Tide Point shirts. I think that you'll like them as much as I do for fishing, for going out to dinner, for whatever you're going to do. They are a fantastic shirt. The sunglasses that I like the most are Wiley X. And Wiley X sunglasses are very protective, like safety glasses. I don't want to get hit in the eye with anything. I always wear sunglasses, even in the very darkest of dusk. I'm still wearing those glasses because I do not want to get hit in the eye with a jig coming out of a tarpon's mouth, with a rod tip, with an errant cast from somebody else. I don't want to get hit with anything. So I wear those sunglasses from the first light to the last light. And the ones I like are the Valor. You can go check them out, and you can use the code EXP20, like Saltwater Experience. Experience 20. EXP20 is the code for Wiley X. Go there and check out those sunglasses. I think you're really going to like them. Director Skipwith, how are you this afternoon?
I'm really good. It's been another fantastic day here at the service, and even more special being able to talk to the American public about what we do here at the service. So it's truly an honor to be here. So thanks for having me.
Well, it's an honor to have you on. It's really, you have a very cool story. I would like to know more about your story. I've been doing a little digging in, but it all starts with an introduction to the outdoors, really, for you to have a career here. I would think that you would have to be interested in the outdoors. And I would imagine, as most people, that interest in the outdoors probably started with someone introducing you to hunting or fishing at a young age, and then kind of developing from there. That's the story for most sportsmen? Is that your story?
Yeah, that's pretty much my story. And it starts with family. So I'm born and raised in Indianapolis, so I'm a city girl. But my family hails from rural Mississippi. So during the summers, that's where my mom, my sister, my father, we would go down and spend time with my grandpa, my cousins, my aunts, my uncles. They were all there in Mississippi. So my grandpa had his garden, he had his hound dogs, and he had his pig farm. So he would always catch me outside hanging out with grandpa, helping him with, it was duties for him, but for me, it was just a lot of fun. And it makes it that much more special when you're doing it with family, being outdoors with family. So that really made a lasting impression. And fishing, I have this story when I was like 5 years old, and my Uncle Joe, called him Uncle Joe, but he was like my great uncle. And we went to a state park. It was about 30 or so minutes from Indianapolis. And he took the whole family. And at the end of the day, he was like, Aurelia. He would actually call me Ree because that was my nickname. And I would be like, yes, Uncle Joe. He's like, "You caught the biggest fish." And I looked at him and I was like, "I'm the only one who caught a fish." So it's those kind of memories that, you can look back years later, and they're so impressionable, but you're having fun. And so that's what I want the next generation to have too, because it's those experiences at a young age that introduces you to conservation. And growing up, you didn't call it conservation. It was a way of life. Like that's just what you did. And now it's you can go out conservation. It's really about being stewards of the land.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take care of the land, they'll take care of you. It's about taking care of the wildlife. I'm here at the service. We're the stewards for the American people. This is their resources. So knowing that that's what our responsibility is, it's just that much more impactful. Knowing that the decisions that we make truly have that long-lasting impact as well as tradition for a lot of folks. So yeah, I started in this field as young and impressionable, and it's lasted with me this long, and it's one of those things that I'll always have. It's a appreciation for nature and what God has created for us.
Yeah. So from that early introduction to the outdoors, did that have an impact on what you chose to study and what you were interested in school?
Yeah. So I studied biology. So I got my bachelor's in biology. I got my master's in molecular genetics in the animal sciences department at Purdue University. I worked for several years before going and getting my law degree. So I always enjoyed wildlife, outdoors. That's really where my niche was. So that's what I ended up studying. And then when it came to the law, that was from experiences and working in a field, and you realize that there's a piece that's missing. And knowing that if I really want to make a difference and be the best that I can be, then I need to figure out how to fix a problem. And so I was working, at an agriculture company, and found out that if you were to take that same product that you had here in the US that you were using for years and you would take it to another country, that you could go to jail. So it was about, even if you have the best science in the world, proven, and you have laws and regulations that prevent you from using that science, then what good is that science? So that's why I went back and got my law degree and practice, because it really is that combination of putting those two together and realizing that you need the laws and in order to facilitate the use of that science for better management practices, and et cetera.
Wow, that's interesting. So when you go back to school, to law school, did you, what would have been, when you couple those two things together, like you're talking about molecular biology and your biology, and then you couple it together with the law, certainly, I would imagine that certainly being director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service wasn't maybe the goal. There would be a career path, and maybe this would have been one of the possible options. But when you're looking at that and you're coupling those together, and then you take a significant portion of your life and devote it to law school, what did you think, if it wasn't the director of the Fish and Wildlife Service, what would have been other things that you could have done with that?
There's so many possibilities, and that's what I like about the law, and that's what I like about science. There's a lot of transfer knowledge that can go into specific niches, and at least when you're looking at law, it's about how do you think about things, how do you evaluate things. So, there's there's a whole world of possibilities that, if I didn't end up here at the service, it was still figuring out a way of making sure that, what policies we put into place for wildlife when it comes to management of our lands so that they're productive for multiple uses. How do we make that work for all of the interested stakeholders? And so kind of that's the foundation that I have for myself, and that can fit in multiple areas, either going to, different organizations or careers or companies. But it has been an honor to serve in this administration, serve for President Trump, and under the leadership of Secretary Bernhardt. And it's really shown me that being in the Fish and Wildlife Service, that you have such an impact on so many people in a variety of ways that is sometimes really understated. And so thinking about a lot of things that we've done this past year, they're absolutely historic. The amount of lands that we've opened for hunting and fishing. And when you look at those, I mean, that's all based in science. You're looking at the regulations. How do you do it safely so you still have sustainable populations?
Right. Well, that's one of the main things that I wanted to talk to you about today. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. We have a little bit of a delay on the Zoom here, but I didn't mean to interrupt you there. But I do want to talk to you about access. And it is this figure correct? 2.3 million acres were opened is that correct?
This year.
Okay, so 2.3 million acres open to hunting and fishing. So that is historic, and that is really amazing. So can you kind of describe that? I mean, people see that figure like, okay, 2.3 million acres. How does that affect me, and where did that land come from, and what was that land being used for previously that now it's open to the public to hunt? I'm really interested in that.
Yeah, so President Trump's administration has been focused on public access, and because it's the people's land. So how do we make that available? The Fish and Wildlife Service, we have 95 million land acres. We have over 700 million water acres. And so when you look at our lands between our National Wildlife Refuge System, and then we also have our national fish hatcheries. We didn't have opportunities open. So we've been directed by the president. The secretary said, hey, get it done. And I really like that aspect of you get it done. And so they weren't there. So this really provided us that chance to say, okay, what species are there that we could hunt, that the populations allow us to do that. We've done the environmental assessment to say, yes, you can do that. So that was looking at, okay, species that we haven't hunted before. So that's an opportunity. When you go and you look at the lands, why weren't those lands open before? Because we could do that. Another piece that was helpful in that as well as we worked with the states. And so when you look at providing access, you can have the lands there, but if people aren't able to decipher through what the regulation says, that becomes a hindrance.
Right.
And the goal is, how do we make this more feasible, efficient, and streamlined? So we looked at what the state's regulations were and seeing how we could align more with those. So we actually were able to reduce our regulations by over 5,000 because they were either duplicative of what the states had or they were inconsistent with what the states had. So this really was a comprehensive approach of we have the acres, we can do it in a safe manner, safe and responsible manner. So let's provide those opportunities for people to take part of their American heritage, which is hunting and fishing, and say, hey, we're open for business.
Wow. That's really awesome. So 2.3 million acres. Now, of the 95 million acres, just so that the audience is clear and understands what we're talking about here, those 95 million acres that you have kind of under your control at the service, is that national forest land, BLM land? What would people know those 95 million acres as?
So they would know those 95 million acres as a national wildlife refuge.
Okay.
So the Fish and Wildlife Service is an independent federal agency under the Department of the Interior. So we're a land management agency. We've been around for about 150 years. So we're the longest existing conservation agency that there is here in the U.S. So we do have that rich history of management. And one of the great things is when you look at a refuge or hatcheries, it's like a living museum. They're actually lands that you go on to do stuff on, like hunt, fish, bird watch, bike, and or if you want to stand and like watch nature happen around you, you can do that as well. But some of those other lands don't have those opportunities,
right,
that the Fish and Wildlife Service has.
Yeah, interesting. I love that. So the one of the things that I wanted to talk about is that's great coming from this administration that 2.3 million acres was kind of passed from the top down, like make this happen. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about is like how a private citizen that is interested in hunting and fishing, and certainly interested in maintaining and protecting and expanding the right to hunt and fish on public lands, how can a public citizen do that? I mean, should they be part of certain conservation groups, or is there something that we can do as private citizens to ensure that we are able to continue to expand access and continue to protect the access that we have now?
No, that's a great question. And I also want to highlight too that this year it was 2.3 million acres, but since President Trump has come in, we've continually expanded that. So in total, since 2017, we've opened over 4 million acres.
Wow.
It's each year we put out a proposed rule of the areas that we are opening or we're proposing to open, and it's part of a public comment process. That's part of the transparency that we have here at the Fish and Wildlife Service and in federal government. And so when that proposed rule goes out, that's when we're looking for the feedback, the good and the bad, from the public saying, hey, leave this open where it's at, or no, maybe, we probably shouldn't open that area. It's too close to X, Y, and Z. So that's part of hearing from the public weighing in. And then always just going to our website. And then there you can look up state by state where our refuges are, where our national fish hatcheries are as well. And then we also have a really cool map that we've put up where it shows the areas that have been expanded and opened for hunting and fishing. So we're really trying to make it as user-friendly as possible so people can take part in these opportunities that we're providing for the public.
Mm-hmm. And then as we move forward, how about the question about like being involved in the conservation groups? Is that helping to protect our access here as well as other public access, in your opinion?
It's always helpful to be part of organizations that align with where your principles are. So I think it's beneficial if you find a conservation organization that aligns with that. And some of them are really good and sophisticated and can put comments together and send in. But then also, we're just as responsive to um, a, a citizen who reaches out to us via email. Um, and we love to hear from the public, either if it's a conservation organization or just, a single individual person. Our job as a federal agency is we serve the American people, we serve the public. And so we need to be responsive regardless of um, where you're at, either with a group or alone. But
Gotcha.
it's always great to be in a group.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting, but as a private citizen, it's nice to know that your voice is heard, whether you're a part of a group that you generally donate to or pay for, or you can send an email and your voice is as important as someone else's that is in a big group. Obviously, a big group has um, uh, money, finances, sometimes lobbyists, all kinds of things that can help to further their agendas. But a private citizen has a voice as well. So when you're opening yourself up to public comment like that, it's interesting. Most of the people that listen to this podcast know and realize and understand that hunters and fishermen not only are the ones that are probably the most interested in a lot of these lands and protection of the lands, but also financially responsible for a tremendous amount of the funding that goes into conservation through a self-imposed tax on the equipment that we buy and purchase, and that all goes back into it. How does anti-hunting comments, how does that kind of play into the planning of this? I mean, you're based in science. That's one of the things that you talk about. So is there an education program for people that just don't understand hunting? They don't understand why anyone would need to hunt or why it's important. Is that a part of what you do at all, an education program?
Yeah. So I'm laughing a little bit on the inside here because you always have a group of folks that are just going to be like, no. So that's always going to be there. And that's just kind of like with any issue. And then you have the other folks that are kind of like, okay, well, tell me a little bit more about it. Help educate me. And that's really powerful. And then you have this other group where, they're all in, they understand it. They're well versed. And I'm going to go through each of the groups really quickly, but I want to start with the group that you mentioned about the self-imposed tax that the hunters and our anglers pay, and bless them, because they truly are the advocates when it comes to conservation. And so they're putting their money where their mouth is. And because of the Pittman-Robertson and Dingell-Johnson Act, their activities fund state fish and wildlife and game agencies for them to be able to do their conservation work. And it really is hoping to sustain our wildlife, and was really excited this year. And you'll see this going forward on our duck stamp. We are honoring our hunters and giving them that acknowledgement that when it comes to conservation, they are truly the ones that are allowing us to be able to be stewards for everyone else, even for the species that aren't hunted. So having that hunting theme of having an accessory on the duck stamp is to give them that acknowledgement for everything that they do for conservation. And then you have the people that are in the middle. And some of these are, folks that, wonder or question, or maybe they're just new to what is conservation, what is new to hunting. And there's a lot of programs that are out there. And the Fish and Wildlife Service, working with state fish and game, there's what you have the R3, which is retain, recruit, reactivate. And educating from all ages, especially starting with youth. And there's a lot of organizations that are out there starting at young ages, either with having youth hunts. We also do veteran hunts. You'll see young adults, like how to give that background, and not only just the education piece, but going out there and showing this is how you can hunt and you can do it safely, or fish. So I'll go out and I'll participate in multiple events to help facilitate and get more people involved. And so there's a lot of programs that are out there for education on, the benefits of hunting, how you can do it. And then the last group is, they'll submit comments just like everyone else. And when we look at our comments, it's the substantive comments. It's the comments that you have based your comment on science, or you've presented some proposal. It's not just, no, I don't like it. That doesn't help give us any information on how to evaluate that. So we need something of substance instead of just saying no. And then we're always here. People have questions and, want to ask. That helps to move the needle instead of just saying no.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, the three different groups, and I'm sure that you're encountering them quite often. I mean, you're working hand in hand with the hunters and fishermen, obviously. But then the other two groups, which honestly comprise probably the majority of the people in the United States, are really the people that are kind of in the middle, or have never been introduced to hunting or fishing. They don't know why someone should do that. They don't know anything about it, and they certainly don't know that hunters and fishermen are financially responsible for what's very interesting to me is something that you just said. Not only the species that are hunted, but often the species that are not hunted as well are funded through that tax. And a lot of people do not know that, do not understand that, do not see any benefit of it. And that's why I ask about the education programs, because it's hard for a hunter. Somebody comes and accosts a hunter saying, "Why are you doing this? I don't understand it," or you whatever. That's different than getting the information from scientists and from the Fish and Wildlife Service. And occasionally, I think that information would be better received through your organization than through someone standing at a trailhead screaming at one another that hunting is actually good and beneficial. And it's just, I'm always in favor of the education programs, but I think that it's a real success story. And when you go to the Bass Pro Shops, the museum that they created, it's all kind of about that theme of hunters and anglers funding conservation over all these years, and the success stories that have been had through that. And that's a good segue into another success story that is in the recent news, and that is the gray wolf being delisted. And that's through your agency as well. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So when a species is delisted, I know that like a long time ago when the American bald eagle was delisted, some people see that as like a tragedy, where it's really the greatest success story that you could have. And especially for the gray wolf that was almost extinct, reintroduced, and now has come off of the endangered species list. That's a huge success story for the whole country. It's a huge success story for wildlife. It's a huge success story for your service. It's a big success story. So I just kind of wonder, like, where that news kind of sits with people, and how you feel about the wolf, because the wolf is a controversial animal anyway, but being off of the list is interesting. So like, how's that sitting?
It depends on which one of those three groups.
Yeah, right.
So, I mean, I'm not sure if this podcast is live or not, but you'll see in the back I have a bald eagle, taxidermy eagle.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
if you look, and the rest of my office, I have other taxidermy animals, but I'm very specific on what's in my office. And the animals that I have are animals that are recovered because it's a success. The Endangered Species Act was created for species that are imperiled, ones that are about to be extinct or going to be extinct in the foreseeable future. So that's when, the U.S. government comes in to say, okay, what is the plan going forward now that this animal is, in the hospital? How do we get it out? Like that's the end goal. The end goal is not to keep them on the list. It's to show that we have recovered the species to the point where the populations are flourishing where we no longer, I'm saying we as in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, need to have it under our jurisdiction. And when it comes off the list, it returns to state management. It's not just out there somewhere. It is now managed by the states. And so, these for the wolf, I mean, we first started trying to delist this back around 2007, and have faced numerous court challenges. And along the way, the science has not changed. The Fish and Wildlife Service continually states, the population is biologically recovered. And you look at all the factors, the 5 factors that puts a species on the list. You look at those same 5 factors.
Could you say what the 5 factors are that puts a species on the list?
Yeah. So you're looking at what is their habitat. So it's curtailment of their habitat. You look at what are the regulatory frameworks or assurances that are in place. You look to see if there is for other man-made factors or other natural factors. You also look at if there is like research or collection of the species that has happened that is happens to impact their population numbers. And then we also have curtailment of the habitat, research, population numbers. You're also looking at regulatory assurances and then man-made and natural factors. So those are like the 5 ones that you're looking at for it being listed or it coming off of the list. And so we've reached the point of saying, okay, this is now biologically recovered, and let's get it off the list. Let's return it to state management. So that is a success. I think there's others that see that having it on the list shows that the ESA is working, while really the ESA is shown to work when we can work together with landowners, because more than half of our 1,600 federally listed species are on private lands. So we have to work with private landowners because that's where those species habitat is. We have to work with organizations as well. We have to work with our state and federal and other federal agencies. So there's a large collaboration and cooperation that must occur in order to reach this. And that's the species was listed before under years, decades ago. So this is truly a success story for the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Yeah, I think so. And so it's interesting, though, because one of the questions I had about the wolf and other animals is that you could have a big rebound in a certain area, like around the Yellowstone area. You could have a lot of wolves, and then you could have another area, say around the Great Lakes, where maybe there are a lot of wolves, or maybe there aren't a lot of wolves, and certain other places where it's part of their native range, but they haven't rebounded to the level of like around the Yellowstone range or whatever. But you're looking at the overall population, saying that maybe they're overpopulated in some areas, underpopulated in others, but the overall numbers for the species in the United States is such that the population is sound, it's thriving, and that would tend to get them off the list. And then it would go back to state management, and a state that thought, well, we don't have enough, they're having a hard time repopulating this area, they may say that there's still no hunting for that particular animal in a certain state. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, that's interesting, because that, there's certain areas that have tremendous amounts of things for wolves to eat, and they are obviously doing very well in those areas, and other areas where maybe they haven't quite filtered back into their native range where they once were. And
right. And that's true. So when we're looking at the listed species, we have recovery plans. And those recovery plans outline what does it take to get a species if it's endangered, what does it take to get it downlisted to threatened, and then what does it take to get it to completely off the list. And so those are, that's also our path forward. And that's also beneficial too when we're working with partners of how do they make their investments in order to reach recovery. If it's more land that the species needs, then that gives them insight. Okay, let's invest in more habitat and more range. Or if it's the population number, then let's look at captive breeding to help supplement the population. So under our recovery plans, it gives that guidance of, okay, this is the area that we're looking at for the range. And that's not necessarily the same thing as the historic range, because a lot has happened.
Right.
Human populations have, increased a lot since before we were probably here. So before we spread out across the U.S. So there's a lot that we look at, and that is guided by our recovery plan to say, yes, the species is flourishing.
Yeah. So what about species in the ocean? What's your role in the service? Is there like a boundary that you're responsible for, or that you have? You know what I'm asking? Like, are you involved in all waters, all of the U.S. waters, fresh or salt water?
No, so we're just the ones that are here within the U.S., not the waters such as in the oceans. That falls under
NOAA.
Under NOAA.
Right.
So so it's funny. So you might have salmon. So if they're in the streams here within the U.S., then they're under our jurisdiction as soon as they go out to the ocean. That same fish then falls under NOAA, and then it comes back, and it's back under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Yeah, that's interesting. In a situation like that you have to work hand in hand with NOAA to get the science straight, I guess, to make sure that the decisions that you're making are not conflicting with one another.
Yeah, that's very true. We work collaboratively with NOAA. And there's joint rules that we work on too. So they also, for the Endangered Species Act, they also administer that as well as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Yeah, interesting, because they're just as you have animals that are threatened and endangered, and then rebound greatly to numbers that are seemingly historic. It happens in the oceans as well with fish like a Goliath grouper and sharks or are there too. So just kind of wondered where that line was drawn. I knew NOAA was the agency that was responsible for that, but I didn't know like how you worked hand in hand with them. It's interesting that salmon example is perfect. That's a perfect example of how as soon as that fish goes into the ocean, it's really under NOAA rather than Fish and Wildlife. Interesting. So one of the things when we first started talking was that you are self-admittedly a city girl. And that's kind of an interesting thing too, because how are we or your agency focusing efforts on getting city folk, kids in particular, to be exposed to the outdoors? Are there programs for that?
Yeah, there are programs. There's organizations that are out there, organizations that the Fish and Wildlife Service is engaging with. So the Fish and Wildlife Service, we have 568 national wildlife refuges, and 101 of those are in urban settings, meaning that they are 25 miles or less than an area that has 250,000 people or more. So we have designated those as urban national wildlife refuges. So it's really not that far to go out and enjoy the great outdoors. You don't have to travel all the way to like Wyoming or Montana.
Right.
And so when you're looking at our urban refuges, they're set up a little bit differently. And when I say set up a little bit differently is that the success of these refuges depends on the community. And so we have to be proactive for people to come and engage with us. Or else if it doesn't fit kind of with the community, then it's hard for us to, because we need volunteers to be able to work, or, how do we start to train the next generations? And if it's not in a format or a template that works for the community, then it's hard to start to build those advocates and that interest in wildlife and the great outdoors. And so for our urban areas, we do have a heavy focus on how do we engage with the communities in which we operate, and especially the surrounding communities. We have outreach programs with the schools.
Yeah.
And in some districts, we provide a lot for the curriculum when it comes to that science piece and that outdoors piece, which is really phenomenal. You think about really, we're able to provide things kind of real time because we're experiencing it, we're seeing it, and we can teach it. There's other times where we have schools that, like their fourth grade class or their third grade class, comes to the refuge like once a year, and some of them we have them as frequently as a couple times each semester to teach them about the outdoors. So there's multiple ways that we're working, and we're really, always open to new ideas because with 80% of the U.S. population living in urban settings, and our goal is to make sure that the tradition of conservation continues. We've got to engage with the urban community, or we're not able to fulfill our mission.
Well, I know that's one of the reasons why I asked that, because it's a double-edged sword. As more people move to the cities, fewer people are living in rural areas. Fewer people are farmers these days. You have mega farms instead of small family farms where, you hunt. That's what you do on a family farm. You go out and you hunt. And people were being introduced to the outdoors in much greater numbers. And it seems like unless you have a family member that is going to show you how to hunt or fish, the chances of getting introduced to it are pretty slim, really. And if people aren't doing it, then they really don't care about it. and they certainly aren't buying licenses, and they certainly aren't buying fishing equipment, and therefore conservation falls to the bottom of anyone's list, whether it comes on their list is to vote for something that makes a difference, or to actually buy something to where a part of that goes back to conservation. A duck stamp is, I mean, the numbers on the duck stamp, how much money does that raise a year? It's a lot. I know that. Do you know offhand?
Since it started in 1934, it has brought in over $6 billion.
$6 billion.
Yes.
That's amazing. And and a federal duck stamp, most of the people listening will know, but that's a part of your hunting license, and that's a requirement for being able to duck hunt. And that's a real success story too. You know, the Wetlands Protection Act and all of the money that goes into that to protect the wetlands and the ducks, and making sure that we actually have some ducks and geese and things like that. Because I think that if it weren't for that amount of funding, you may have a shopping mall or an airport or something built across every wetland, or wetland could have been filled or whatever. But that was a huge conservation success story as well, to protect the wetlands, and the duck stamp and all that money is a big part of that. But I'm glad to hear about the outreach to the urban communities, because without people being introduced into hunting and fishing, without people understanding what it's about, it just is not a priority. So that's really important. So we've talked about a lot of different things. I think that it's really exciting that the access is a big part of your agenda. And do you see that continuing as you move forward and trying to open more?
Oh, most definitely. And that's why we're here. We're here to serve. So that means that we need to find those opportunities and continue on this trend, as well as in the same thought is, we've got to make sure that we're working with private landowners too, and making sure that, the decisions that we make, they're always going to be based in sound science, the rule of law, and a thing called common sense. And so it's working lands still must be, working lands. And how do we use the science to be able to balance those interests as well? So we're always looking for access. And then when we're working in, other areas as well too, it's how do we take care of the animals, but how do we also make sure that people can make a living off of their lands that they have?
Yeah, the multi-use aspect you mentioned earlier, which is it's really important. But when you have all of these different things tugging on each end of something like a species that is having trouble, or hunting rights or whatever, it's hard to balance all of that. And I guess it all comes down to what the science says, and that's where you're basing most of your or really all of your kind of decisions are based in science, right?
Right. And when we do our evaluations, such as like if another federal agency comes to us and they need to, let's say, build a dam because they need water or utilities in that area, we work with them. We look at, what is the impact to the species there? If we see that there's something that could adversely impact that species, we provide alternatives, alternative measures or actions that they can take to minimize that impact. So that's why there's discussions that we have. It's an iterative process, knowing that there is multiple uses of the same resources, but we use the science to be able to come to that final conclusion.
Interesting. Well, it's a big job. You seem to be doing an excellent job with keeping all of these things in mind and keeping the wildlife at front and center, and all of the other things that are ancillary to that. They have to be considered as well. And so it seems like it's a much bigger job than it looks like at first glance. I'm sure that when you get in there, you realize, wow, there are a lot of people and organizations and things tugging on every decision that you make. But you seem to be doing a really good job with it. I thank you for that, and I thank you for keeping the access as a major priority, because for me, access is the most important. It really is. Well, conservation of the species is the most important, but then having access to go and even just see them, hunt them, fish for them, just to be able to access our public lands is super important. So thank you for that. And thank you for spending this time with us. Is there anything you'd like to add before we finish up?
This President Trump, Secretary Bernhardt have been instrumental in making sure that our public lands are open for the American people. And part of getting the message out about the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is exactly what we're doing here today. And the legacy that I want to leave is one day, if you ask a little boy or a little girl, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would love for them to say, hey, I want to be, an engineer or maintenance worker or law enforcement or biologist over at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Everyone hears about the national parks. Everyone hears about museums and zoos, et cetera. But it's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that is at the forefront when it comes to conservation of our wildlife, and being able to be here today and speak really helps to get the message out of what we're doing and allow us to be able to make sure that we're reaching that next generation, that they have wildlife and lands that they can go and hunt and fish and enjoy like we're able to do today.
Nice. And so if people are interested in following along, getting more information, what are the places that you would point them? I know that you have Twitter. I've followed your Twitter. You're pretty active on Twitter, and you do a good job on it. So that might not be something that people would think that the director would be have a pretty good Twitter feed, but you do.
Yeah, and that's the whole point of, we have to figure out what are the methods of communication that works for the people. And if we're going to get our message out, then we've got to communicate that way. So yes, I'm active on Twitter, US FWS Director. And then you can always visit us at www.fws.gov. Would love to hear from anyone, and we're always here.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Director Skipwith, and I look forward to doing this again. We'll do it again when there's some sort of pending issue that we can talk about, and maybe you can educate us on what's going on. I'd love to have you back on the show again.
That sounds fantastic.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Everybody go follow and get more information, and we'll see you again next week with another amazing guest. All right. See you.